Thanks. Yeah. Miles Davis, 7 Steps to Heaven. Are you ready to have some fun with the string quartet? Are you ready for this? We're going to have some fun, I promise you. Welcome to our world of alternative improvisational chamber music. Let's say hi to the viewing audience out there. Hi, viewing audience. Hi. Hi. We're going out all over. We're going to have some fun, and you and the viewing audience are going to have, on TV, you're going to have a chance to phone in some questions and criticisms, if you wish, later on in the show. What we really are all about up here is that as string players, we are determined to play all the music that we weren't allowed to play at Juilliard on violins, and that means anything, mostly jazz, though. So what we'd like to do is, the first way to do that is the building block is to use emulation and imitation. So we think about imitating other instruments. You may do that at home too when you play your instruments. In a jazz group, you've got certain instruments that you're familiar with, the bass, the drums, the piano, the guitar, and the saxophone, for instance. And we try to think about that when we build our group up from the bottom. We have the major building block right here behind me. You hear Mark. He's playing a cello, but he flattens his fingers out, and it turns into a bass. And he's walking the bass right now, which is a fundamental part of jazz. He's walking. He's walking. His boots are made for walking. And he'll just walk right off stage if we let him, but we have to chain him down to make that happen. Then we got the drums. If you look at a violin, you've got the possibility of hitting, scratching, rubbing. There's just about anything you can do to it if you don't have any respect for the instrument. Daryl's rubbing his violin right now, and he's making it sound like brushes on the drums. Mr. Silverman over here has gone to Jazz University for hundreds of years to learn how to make the 88 keys of a piano play chords of only 2 notes. He's comping. And then on top of that, we have to improvise a little bit. And that's what we'll do now. Blues for Oaktown.
Thank you very much. My name's Mark, and I play the cello. And when I was your age, I guess I wanted to be a rock and roll musician. And the great thing about being in Turtle Island is that I get to play a lot of different instruments on this one instrument. You've heard me play the bass. But I always really wanted to play the guitar. And then the saxophone seemed kind of nice, too. I think the instrument I most wanted to play and did play and get to still play is the drums. Thank you.
summer. Well, my name's Daryl, and I play the other violin in the group. You usually have two violins in a string quartet, otherwise you'd only have a trio. So I got started playing classical violin when I was about 9, and I kind of got into playing fiddle after a while. I stopped taking lessons, although it was really good to have those lessons because then I knew where to put my fingers. And got into playing all kinds of American folk music and fiddle music and all that kind of stuff. Now, the funny thing about American music is that it borrows from every other kind of music. And so even when you're playing fiddle, you're playing parts of rock and roll and jazz and the blues and all the other kinds of music that is in the country. So, in fact, one of the great things about fiddle is that it borrows from so many different styles to begin with. In fact, Joe Venuti, who was one of the first great jazz violinists, it played a style that was copied by most of the country fiddle players that you hear. He made up a thing called the double shuffle, which you hear country fiddle players play all the time, and jazz violinists now play it again, too. So it all mixes up. I'll play a little bit of that double shuffle.
Wow. Now, my name's Danny, and I play the viola. Now, the viola is really big and heavy compared to the violin. So much heavier and bigger that in music, in classical music especially, you'll hear it used to make something sound kind of sad, like Brahms. But it's also used to sound cheerful and happy, too. But in jazz, strangely enough, the range is exactly the same as the tenor saxophone, which also has a kind of a melancholy sound. Now here's a fragment of a tune by Thelonious Monk called Ruby, My Dear.
Hi, I'm Tracy, and I play the other violin also. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about how I started playing the violin. I was about 4 years old, and I got on my trike. See, I was lucky enough to have a guy who lived down at the end of my block who was a professional violin player, played in an orchestra. And I got on my trike one day, rode down to the end of the block, and I heard this beautiful music coming out of the window. It sounded like this. Haunting sound. I thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. So I got back on my trike, I rode home, and I got my brother, who was 2 years older than me, and I said, Brian, you got to come down and listen to this. You got to hear this. There's somebody singing. So he got on his bike, and we rode down there, and there it was again. I said, listen to that person singing. And he said, and I'll never forget, he said, boy, are you stupid. He said, that's not somebody singing, that's a flute. So we went home, and our folks told us it was a violin, and then they started paying for violin lessons for the next 15 years. But anyway, we're going to play another song for you. And this is a jazz tune, and this is different from that first one where we had bass and drums and piano and saxophone. And this one, we're all four of us going to play together in an ensemble, kind of like a saxophone section in a band. It's called Stolen Moments. Thanks a lot. And you know, there are only 12, probably most of you know this, there are only 12 notes in the musical scale, right? But think of how many different styles of music that you can do with those 12 notes. You know, if you just go into a record store, you'll see there's all kinds of rock bands, classical music from piano to opera, all these great ensembles, rap, dance music, jazz, blues, gospel, you got country and western. There's just all kinds of musical styles, and you know, for all of those styles, there are people who think that their style is the only kind that you should listen to. You know, you'll have metalheads who think you're crazy if you listen to something else, or classical snobs who think, how can you listen to rock and roll? Or jazz Nazis who think everything else is wrong, right? Well, you know, to me, my music is kind of like friends, and I got friends of every race and color and size and religion, and I just care if they're good people, and I don't care about, you know, about those other things. So you should see my record collection. I got like LL Cool J CD right next to Luciano Pavarotti sitting right next together, and I love them both. Or I'll have Miles Davis next to Soundgarden, two of my favorite bands right there, you know, or Prokofiev next to the Beatles. I love them both, and they're both my favorites, you know. For instance, just last year, I'm sitting in the car with Daryl, and he puts on a tape for me of this guy named Egberto Gismonti. I never heard of him before. It's a Brazilian piano player, and now I can't get through the day without listening to him because he's just the greatest. And you never know, somebody may turn you on to some great music, and if you find something great, you should turn on a friend to that music too, because that's kind of your responsibility to do that. Because you never know, music may be the only friend you have sometimes. So I'm going to show you how we get some of the styles that we do. When we play jazz, we do things a little differently than you're taught by classical teachers. If you know how to do vibrato, or you're going to learn how to do vibrato, you probably do it something like this. And it's used to warm up the sound. But in jazz, we try to cool down the sound like this. These are different kind of vibrato. And in classical music, you might play something very evenly and clearly, and it might sound like this. But in jazz, we swing it, and we use ghost notes, which means we drop some of the notes out. It sounds like this. And And here's something, when I was your age, I really loved a guy named Jimi Hendrix. And I thought that was the coolest thing, because he was a rock star, and he was dead, so I knew he had to be good. And I wanted to play guitar, but I couldn't really play guitar, so I played it on violin. So we're gonna do a Hendrix tune for you, and this is called Gypsy Eyes. And this is a really we do it a little different because we do a viola solo in the middle, and Jimmy never thought of that.
Thanks. I'd like to talk a little bit about rhythm, how we generate rhythm in this group. You notice we don't quite play like a lot of other string quartets. When they play rhythm, it's generally... Well, that's great. That's a very important part of rhythm, but when we play contemporary music and other kinds of music that is modern, we like to draw from all the different kinds of music that come out of America, and that means just about every country, because people from all over the world have come to live here, and especially Afro-American music, jazz, and the rock and roll, and all those kinds of music. The greatest gift, musical gift that we've received from the African Americans who have come here has been this beautiful, elastic, driving, danceable rhythm. And combined with all the different other kinds of music, it's really exploded into this fantastic kind of music that has kind of taken over the world. So we were looking for ways of turning the violin into a drum and something that can generate that sort of rhythm. So we were looking for ways that other players, like fiddle players, other traditional kinds of musicians, have figured out to put rhythm in, because a lot of cultures, a lot of traditional cultures, just use the fiddle to dance to. You'll notice in a lot of fiddle music, the fiddle player, when he's not playing the melody, he'll just be hitting the backbeat. You know what a backbeat is, right? In a bar of 4 beats, the backbeat is the second and fourth bar, and that's what I'm doing now. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the backbeat. And that's a very simple beat. That works pretty well for maybe country music and some rock music, but it doesn't always work for jazz, some of the more complicated kind of music that we're doing. So what we wanted to do was expand that. So the first thing we said, well, what can we do? We can add an upstroke. We're doing a downstroke, right? We can add a stroke in between. So we got that. Now, what else can we do? We don't have that many instruments in the group, so we have to have somebody playing notes also. So we had to add notes. We tried adding notes on upstroke. Now we got something that sort of sounds like drums and a rhythm guitar. And we thought maybe we could add notes on the downstroke too. Then we thought, well, we can do a lot with that. We can speed it up. We can slow it down. We can do all kinds of different accents. So we got pretty much a whole drum set and rhythm section in one violin. So we'd like to do a piece now that was written by us. It's called Dexterous, and it's dedicated to one of the great American composers of all time. Speaking, of course, of James Brown. And it's kind of try to adapt his style to the violins. So we're going to play now Dexterous. 2, 1, 2, ho!
you very much. Now, I know all of you are musicians, and I was wondering how many of you are composers? Raise your hand. Not everybody. Okay, well, that's all right. The great thing about Turtle Island is that we're all composers, and that last piece that Daryl wrote, he wrote specifically for the group. He can write for this group like nobody else because he knows it backwards and forwards. Now, we've had a lot of improvisation going on as well. What's the difference? Composition and composing and improvising. People, when you say, what's improvising, you usually say, well, it's making it up. It's really spontaneous composing. So that's what you've been seeing. We've been composing spontaneously, and Mr. J.S. Bach was a wonderful improviser, and he improvised on the organ like nobody's business. And I was thinking, you know, you may not all improvise on your instruments, but you all improvise. If you're going to call up a friend, you want to make a date, you want to get together, you don't write down what you're going to say, right? You sort of have an idea, and then you improvise. Just whatever is going to come out of your mouth, you hope it's going to be what you were thinking you'd say. And that's what's been going on with us when we do our solos. We're hoping that our plan will work, and it usually does. And what oftentimes happens with composers is they'll improvise and they'll write it down, and then it becomes their composition. So I'm going to play a solo piece for you that began as an improvisation, and then it was recorded on a record, one of our records, Metropolis, and then later on I wrote it down so that other people could play it. And it's a piece dedicated to my sister. It's called Giulio.
Roxana. Amazing, isn't it? Well, here's the big moment now for all of you viewers out there. And we want you to call in and ask questions. And as I said before, and criticize us. That's what we're here for. The number is 1-800-578-1396. 1-800-578-1396. Be there or be square. Okay, let's hear from you. And I also want to play one last piece for you here. You can also have this kind of fun with classical music. In case you were wondering, since we play these instruments, whether we ever do that, we do, and we will right now. We're going to play Bach. Ah, Bach, you say. But it is something we call Bach's lunch.
All right, we have a caller through the magic miracle of electronics. We have a caller from Richmond, faraway Richmond, Virginia, almost on the other side of the world. Come in, please.
Yeah.
Caller.
Hey, what's up?
We are up. We are up on stage here waiting for your question.
Yeah, you guys sound great, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, my name's David Fugman. I'm a bass player, and I wanted to thank Mr. Sumners for doing such a wonderful job. Thank you.
He says you're welcome.
And I was wondering, you guys are so classically trained and everything. Did you ever think about the ridicule that you get from more traditional musicians from what you're doing? It isn't exactly standardized.
Nothing but support from a lot of classical musicians. And in fact, Yo-Yo Ma wants to take lessons from us, and we're going to be performing together, something that he's been wanting to do. Well, we want to take lessons from him, too. You know, it's a two-way street.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering because, I know that all this, the instrumental style of music has grown and experimented and almost become more forefront these days. And you guys are obviously part of that genre also. Do you ever feel like people like Manrig also, and you get into music like that, do you even think about how people will view it in the future as compared to like all the popular music that's out there?
Well, that's hard to say. You know, this music is popular with us,
yeah.
And we just try to make the best music we can and kind of follow our hearts, and do the music that we really believe in. We try not to think about posterity or posterior or anything like that, because really, who knows, really, you could be hit by a car tomorrow. But
also, hopefully the lines will blur between the different kinds of music, and we'll stop having people decide they're going to go hear classical music and they're going to hear jazz. Maybe they are just blurring together so that they'll be hopefully more interested in music.
Yeah,
right?
That's a constant process.
What it is.
Artists are trying to wiggle out of categories. Okay, let's see. Let's have a live question here. What's your name?
My name is Kristen Hirschberger, and I attend Grand Park Middle School. And
Right.
my question for you is, since this is a jazz concert, why do you play only string instruments?
Since this is a jazz concert, why do we play string instruments? Well, because it doesn't really matter what instruments you play as long as you're playing the music that you love. Jazz has always had string instruments. Stuff Smith was probably the first great jazz violinist. He came to prominence in the 20s. He had played for about a year at the Cotton Club in Harlem, great black jazz violin player. Of course, there have been many, many great bass players, and those are actual string bass players in jazz. Those are string instruments. Of course, you have Stefan Grappelli and a lot of other styles. It's really not what instrument you play, but what you like to play on it. And that's part of the challenge, is trying to figure out ways to play a style on whatever instrument. Let's see, we have a caller from Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Hi,
Come in, yes.
Hi. I just was wondering, do you have any CDs out? Have you produced any CDs, or am I going to be able to get any of your music?
Yes, indeed, we have several thousand CDs. Well, they're all the same one, but no, that's it. Do you have a fax machine? We'll fax one to you. No. There are several, yes. We have approximately 8 or 9 or 12 right now. The latest one is called By the Fireside. It's perfect for the holidays. And before that, Who Do We Think We Are? And, well, the list goes on, and you can get them in your local record stores, and it's on the Windham Hill Jazz label. How about another live question?
Hello, I'm Amber Lockhart, and I represent Woodbridge Senior High School. And we would like to know, have you just traveled in the United States, or have you traveled abroad? And if you have traveled abroad, which countries have you been?
We've been all over the globe. And, well, we're going... Just doesn't come out of here, does it? Oh, there it goes. We're going to Germany, actually, next month. We've been to Germany many times. And Austria we're going to on this trip. We were in Brazil last summer for their winter festival. That's the way it works down there. And let's see, we may be going back to Brazil this June. We're hoping to get to Italy this summer. So and we've been to the Far East. Where have we been on the Far East? Singapore, Japan, Hong Kong, Brunei. We get around. We got a caller from Hampton, Virginia. Come in, Hampton.
I was just wondering, I wanted to know, how long have you guys been together, and, how did y'all get started?
Sometimes we wonder that, too, about the middle of a long concert when we're not quite playing in tune. We say, how long have we been together, and have we been together at all? But the band has been a band for about 10 years. In fact, this is our 10-year anniversary.
What'd you buy me, Daryl?
Ago. And, yeah, we were an overnight sensation after about 10 years, and here we are. We named it the Turtle Island String Quartet when we realized that Turtle Island was the American Indian name for the North American continent. And the kind of music that we wanted to play, which was jazz and American music, is really music of the world. It's very different from a lot of string quartets who play European music. So we figured that Turtle Island would be a good name because, of course, America is a place where people have come from all over the world to try to live together. All right, let's have another live question.
My name is Joshua Lattin from Woodbridge Senior High School. And in college, did all of you major in music, and what schools did you go to?
We all have really different backgrounds. We'll just run it really quick here because we're so different. I went to high school and a little bit of college, took English in college, believe it or not. but I learned a lot of what I know about music on my own after I went to school, and I worked very hard. I wish I'd worked harder when I was in school because I had, actually, believe it or not, I had more time then, so I had to fit it in.
I went to the Cleveland Institute of Music and took English as well as cello. And these guys went to the famed Juilliard School, and they survived to tell the tale.
Yeah. Didn't seem to hurt their playing, though.
Nope.
Okay, do we have another question from Arlington, Virginia? We'll take a call.
How are you gentlemen doing today?
There we go.
Arlington, Virginia calling.
Hello,
Yes.
Arlington.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good.
I had the pleasure of seeing Clarence Gatemouth Brown about 4 months ago and was wondering how much of an influence the Delta Blues had on you and your group.
Good question. Clarence Gatemouth Brown, one of the great musicians of the Texas, Louisiana area, great guitar player and violin player. I think that we've all been influenced by the blues. In fact, I think all American music, contemporary American music, has been influenced by the blues. It's a very universal thing, and it creeps into everything we do. Jazz, of course, is very blues-oriented. It's one of those universal expressions that is very, very deep, and it's really hard to separate it out as a thing because it's in everything that we do.
And we've been so influenced by rock and roll, which is totally influenced by the blues. Just listen to the latest Rolling Stones stripped album, and you'll all hear that.
Okay, another live question.
My name is Grace Willis. I'm from Grand Park Middle School. I would like to know, how does a classical background prepare one for a jazz career?
That's a good question because you have to kind of unlearn a lot of the things that you learn in school. And what happens is you get all these good habits that your teachers spend years trying to build up in you, and then you have to lose all those good habits, and it's hard to do that. But if you try, I'm sure you can. So we got a call from Richmond, Virginia. Richmond?
Hi. I used to play French horn, and so I understand having the limit to the kind of music that you can play. I used to die for a piece of Wagner or Erickson where you at least get something besides the papas. And when you're doing this, you're giving more voice to the instrument that you've got. What do you find most gratifying about being able to discover the different voices and tenors of your instruments?
I guess the thing that really is most gratifying about playing around with the rhythm and making up new rhythms to do with the group is that it just feels good. There's a good feeling. Western European music, by and large, is very concerned with the head and the heart, both very important parts of the body. We like to involve the entire body in the process, not leaving out any particular organ. Next question.
Hello, I'm Michael McKay from Woodbridge Middle School, and I was wondering what kind of musicians have inspired you and your music?
Every possible kind of musician, I think, has inspired us. We try to listen to all different kinds of music. As Tracy said earlier, we consider these musicians in a way our friends, and we don't care what kind of music they're from as long as they reach us emotionally. And we've listened to all the great jazz artists. I have a lot of very old records, old sounding records from the 30s and 20s, and they're just as great as anybody from the modern stuff. So I guess that's about all the time we have for questions. We'd just like to repeat again that if you have a computer and you're online, you can send questions in to the Internet Arts Edge address here, and I'll repeat that. It's http://artsedge, ARTSEDGE .Kennedy- and that, of course, is a uppercase dash, which turns into an underline, center.org. So those of you with computers, you know what all that stuff is about, that gobbledygook there. And We are online, and in fact, we have a web page. Turtle Island has a web page on the World Wide Web, so look for us. All the big search engines have us in their computers. So just like to say that the program was produced by the Prince William Network as part of the Performing Arts Series. We're really happy to have had the opportunity to play with you guys. It was also presented by the Kennedy Center and the Prince William County Schools. We're going to go out here with a tune from Brazil. Yeah! We'd like to thank all of you for being so enthusiastic and helping us get through this show. We'll go out with a tune that we learned in Brazil when we were down there, and come back again on March 19th for a program about Shakespeare. And if you think Shakespeare's not relevant, think again. He's really the coolest thing. So this one's called Tombo.
We can do a clave rhythm. Sound like this. Now you can go back to the straight rhythm if you want. Let's hear some clave.